I never thought a wooden fence post would become the center of a neighborhood war. But then again, I never imagined someone would deliberately ram it with their car every single day for 3 months straight. My name is Thomas Quincy, and I bought my house in Meadowbrook Estates, Arizona, about 2 years ago. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch on the corner lot of Sycamore Drive and Pine Street. The location seemed perfect at first. Plenty of sunlight, a decent backyard, and what I thought would be a quiet suburban life. The HOA seemed standard when I signed the papers. Monthly fees, some basic rules about lawn care and paint colors. Nothing too extreme, or so I thought. The trouble started about 6 months into living there. I had installed a simple wooden fence along the property line near the street corner. Nothing fancy, just a basic 4x4 post with some horizontal slats to mark where my property ended. The corner was a bit tight for turning, but anyone with basic driving skills could navigate it without issue. I had measured everything, checked the HOA regulations, and made sure the fence was exactly 2 inches inside my property line. Everything was legal and proper. Then came Brenda. Brenda Carmichael was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with short blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from a mile away. She drove a white Lexus SUV that was absolutely too large for her to handle properly. I first met her when she knocked on my door 3 days after I installed the fence. "That fence is a hazard," she announced, not even bothering with pleasantries. I stood in my doorway, confused. "Excuse me, your fence. It's too close to the street. It creates a blind spot for drivers turning the corner." I shook my head. "I measured everything according to the county regulations and the HOA bylaws. It's well within the legal limits." She pursed her lips, those thin lines around her mouth deepening. "I'm telling you it's a hazard. As HOA president, I'm recommending you move it back at least 3 feet. That would put it in the middle of my yard, and the bylaws don't require that." "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel and marching back to her house, which was directly across the street from mine. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, I walked outside to find a small scrape on my fence post. White paint transfer, the same color as Brenda's Lexus. At first, I thought maybe it was an accident. The corner was tight after all, but then it happened again on Thursday, and Friday, and the following Monday. Each time, a fresh scrape, always at the same height, always with white paint transfer. By the end of the 2nd week, the post was looking pretty beaten up. I set up my phone to record one morning, positioning it in my living room window with a clear view of the corner. Sure enough, around 8:30, Brenda came cruising down Pine Street, approached the corner at Sycamore, and deliberately swung wide so her rear bumper clipped my fence post. Not hard enough to damage her car, just enough to hit the post. She did it on purpose. I could see her adjusting her steering just before impact. I had my proof, but I wanted to handle this civilly first. That afternoon, I walked across the street and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes." "Brenda, I have video evidence of you hitting my fence post with your car, multiple times. I need you to stop." The smile disappeared. "I don't know what you're talking about. I have it on video. You're deliberately hitting my fence post every morning. Maybe if your fence wasn't positioned so dangerously, I wouldn't clip it while making a normal turn. You're doing it on purpose. The video clearly shows you steering into it." She crossed her arms. "Prove it in court then." "Oh wait, you won't, because you know that fence is a hazard. Remove it and there won't be a problem." I stood there, stunned by her audacity. "I'm not removing a fence that's legally installed on my own property." "Then I guess we're at an impasse." She closed the door in my face. The next morning she hit the post again. and the next day, and the day after that. I filed a police report, bringing my video evidence. The officer who took my statement, a middle-aged guy named Officer Rodriguez, watched the footage and sighed. This is technically property damage, but it's so minor that it falls into a civil dispute category. Since it's an ongoing HOA issue, you might have better luck going through proper channels. Document everything, keep recording, and if the damage becomes significant, we can press charges. So I just have to let her keep destroying my property. I'm not saying that. I'm saying build your case. Get estimates for repairs. Keep detailed records. Then you can take her to small claims court, or we can pursue criminal mischief charges if the total damage exceeds $500. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was something. I started keeping meticulous records. Date, time, photographic evidence of each new scrape. I got an estimate from a fence company for replacing the post, $240. Not enough yet for serious legal action, but getting there. Meanwhile, Brenda escalated things. I received a formal letter from the HOA, signed by her and 2 other board members, stating that my fence was under review for being a traffic safety hazard, and that I needed to appear at the next HOA meeting to defend its placement. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening at the community center, a bland rectangular building at the entrance of our neighborhood. About 30 residents showed up, most of them looking bored. Brenda sat at a folding table at the front with 2 other board members. Gerald Patterson, a retired accountant who seemed to just nod at whatever Brenda said, and Susan Morrison, a timid woman in her 60s who rarely made eye contact. Next on the agenda, Brenda announced in her most official voice, is the matter of the fence at 2847 Sycamore Drive. Mr. Quincy, please come forward. I walked to the front, carrying a folder with all my documentation. Mr. Quincy has installed a fence that creates a dangerous blind spot at the corner of Sycamore and Pine. We've received multiple complaints from residents who have difficulty navigating the turn. Multiple complaints, I interrupted. From who? That's confidential. I'd like to see these complaints in writing. The HOA is not required to disclose the identities of complainants. Actually, I said, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. According to Article 7, Section 3, any resident accused of a violation has the right to review the complaints filed against them, with names redacted if necessary for privacy. I'm requesting to see these complaints. Brenda's face reddened slightly. I'll have to check with our attorney. I'll wait. The room was silent for a moment. Finally, Susan spoke up in her quiet voice. Brenda, do we actually have written complaints? I've received verbal complaints, Brenda snapped. From who? I pressed. From myself, primarily. As a resident who uses that corner daily, I find it hazardous. So there's one complaint from you, and you didn't put it in writing. My observations as HOA president carry weight. I opened my folder and pulled out photos. Here's the fence in question. As you can see, it's positioned exactly 26 inches inside my property line. County regulations require a minimum of 18 inches. HOA bylaws require 24 inches. I'm in full compliance. I also have traffic studies showing that the turning radius at that corner is more than adequate for standard vehicle navigation. Additionally, I have video evidence that you, Brenda, have been deliberately hitting my fence post with your vehicle on a daily basis for the past 3 months. I pulled out my phone and projected the video onto the wall using a borrowed projector I'd set up earlier. The footage showed clear as day. Brenda approaching the corner, adjusting her steering, and clipping the post with her rear bumper. I played 3 different instances, all showing the same deliberate action. The room erupted in murmurs. Several residents looked shocked. Gerald leaned over to Brenda and whispered something urgently. "That's ridiculous," Brenda said loudly. "I clipped the post because it's positioned dangerously. The footage shows you steering into it, not away from it. You're committing property damage." "I'm doing no such thing. This is defamatory." "It's documented fact. I've filed a police report. I have repair estimates, and I have 3 months of daily incidents recorded." An older man in the back raised his hand. "I live 2 houses down from that corner. I use it every day. Never had a problem with the fence." A woman near the front nodded. "I walk my dog past there twice daily. The fence doesn't create any visibility issues." Brenda was losing control of the room. "This meeting is getting off track. The fact remains that as HOA president, I have concerns about this fence." "Personal concerns," I corrected, "which you're trying to enforce through your position while simultaneously vandalizing my property to prove your point." "I am not vandalizing anything." "Then explain the video evidence." She stood up abruptly. "This matter is tabled until next month's meeting. We need to consult with legal counsel." "There's nothing to consult about," I said. "My fence is legal and staying where it is." "We'll see about that. This meeting is adjourned." I left that night knowing I'd won the battle but not the war. Brenda wasn't the type to give up easily, and I was right. The next morning she hit the post again, this time harder. Hard enough that the post cracked. That was it. I'd had enough. I called a friend of mine from college, Marcus Chen, who worked as a structural engineer. I explained the situation and he started laughing. "You want to do what? Replace the wooden post with something that won't break?" "Thomas, there are limits to petty revenge." "This isn't revenge. This is protecting my property. She's proven she won't stop." "What are you thinking? Steel post." I was thinking bigger. "An I-beam, a real one, set in concrete, 3 feet deep." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're serious?" "Completely." "That's going to cost you. I don't care." "Can you help me design it so it's structurally sound and legal?" "Legal isn't the question. Ethical might be." "She's been vandalizing my property for months. I have every right to reinforce it." He sighed. "All right, but you're buying lunch for a year." Over the next week, Marcus helped me plan the installation. We settled on a 6-inch steel I-beam, 8 feet long, with 3 feet buried in concrete and 5 feet above ground. It would be powder-coated black to look somewhat decorative, and we'd attach the same wooden slats to it so it looked similar to the original fence. From a casual glance, it would appear to be the same fence, just repaired. But underneath, it would be pure steel anchored in 3 cubic feet of reinforced concrete. The installation took 2 days. We dug the hole on a Saturday, mixed and poured the concrete, and set the beam perfectly vertical using a level and temporary braces. On Sunday, we let it cure while I kept watch to make sure Brenda didn't try to interfere. On Monday, we attached the wooden slats and cleaned up the site. It looked almost identical to the original fence, maybe a bit sturdier, but nothing that would draw immediate attention. I set up multiple cameras this time. One in my window, one in my garage pointed at the corner, and one disguised as a birdhouse mounted on my roof. I wanted every angle covered. Tuesday morning arrived. I made coffee and sat in my living room waiting. At 8:27, Brenda's white Lexus appeared, cruising down Pine Street. She approached the corner at the exact same angle she always did, lined up for her usual bump against the post. The impact was spectacular. Her rear bumper hit the I-beam with a solid crunch. The Lexus jolted to a sudden stop, the entire rear end bouncing from the impact. The steel beam didn't budge even a millimeter. Her bumper, however, crumpled. A piece of white plastic fell to the ground. Her taillight shattered. I watched through the window as Brenda threw her car into park and jumped out. She stared at her damaged bumper, then at the post, then back at her bumper. Her face went from pale to bright red in about 5 seconds. She marched up to my door and started pounding on it. I took my time answering, carrying my coffee mug with me. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed the moment I opened the door. "Good morning, Brenda. Something wrong?" "You know damn well what's wrong. You did something to that post." "I repaired it. You kept damaging it, so I reinforced it." "You can't do that. You can't just put a steel post there." "Actually, I can. It's my property, it's within all legal boundaries, and I have every right to maintain and reinforce my fence as I see fit." "You did this on purpose. You knew I'd hit it." "Well, if you'd been driving properly and not deliberately hitting my fence every single day for 3 months, this wouldn't be a problem, would it? You're going to pay for my repairs." "No, actually, you're going to pay for mine. I have 3 months of documented damage, video evidence of deliberate property destruction, and police reports. You want to go to court? I'd love to." She was shaking with rage. "This isn't over." "I think it is. Unless you plan to keep hitting a steel beam with your car. That's going to get expensive for you." She stormed off, got back in her damaged Lexus, and drove away with her bumper dragging slightly. I closed the door and called Marcus. "It worked," I said. "She actually hit it, like clockwork. Her whole rear bumper is crushed. She's going to retaliate. Let her try." But I underestimated Brenda's vindictiveness. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Thornton from a law firm in Phoenix. The letter stated that I had installed an unauthorized structure that posed a grave danger to motorists, and demanded I remove it within 7 days or face daily fines of $100. I called my own attorney, Jennifer Walsh, whom I'd used when buying the house. I forwarded her all my documentation: the original permits, the property survey, the HOA bylaws, the video evidence of Brenda's vandalism, the police reports, everything. Jennifer called me back within 2 hours. "This is the most clear-cut case I've seen in months. They have no legal standing. Your fence is legal, reinforcing it is legal, and you have documented proof that their HOA president has been committing ongoing property damage. I'll draft a response." Her response was beautiful. It laid out every legal precedent, cited specific Arizona property laws, referenced the documented vandalism, and ended with a polite but firm statement that any attempt to fine me would result in immediate legal action against the HOA and Brenda, personally, for harassment and property damage. She also included copies of all the video evidence and police reports. The HOA went quiet for about a week. Then I got another letter, this time directly from Brenda, not on HOA letterhead. It was handwritten and unhinged. "You think you're clever," it read. "You think your little steel post makes you safe. You've made an enemy. I will make your life miserable. I will find every violation, every tiny infraction, and I will bury you in fines. You will regret ever moving to this neighborhood." I photographed the letter and added it to my growing file. This was beyond HOA disputes now. This was harassment. I called Officer Rodriguez, who'd taken my original report. "It's escalated," I told him. He came by that afternoon, read the letter, and took it as evidence. This is a written threat. Combined with the ongoing property damage and her position of authority, we might have a harassment case. Keep documenting everything. Don't engage with her directly. Let it all go through your attorney. The next HOA meeting was intense. I arrived to find about 50 residents this time, word having spread about the drama. Brenda sat at the front table looking composed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Before she could call the meeting to order, I stood up. I'm requesting a vote of no confidence in the HOA president." The room went silent. "You can't do that," Brenda said. "Actually, according to Article 12, Section 6 of our bylaws, any resident can call for a vote of no confidence with a petition signed by at least 15% of homeowners. I have signatures from 22%. I held up a clipboard with pages of signatures. I'd spent the past week going door to door, explaining the situation, showing the video evidence, and gathering support. Gerald looked nervous. "Is this procedurally correct?" Susan was already flipping through a copy of the bylaws. "He's right. With sufficient signatures, we have to hold a vote." "This is absurd," Brenda said. "I've been president for 4 years. And in 4 years, how many times have you abused your position for personal vendettas?" I asked. "Show of hands, how many people here have been threatened with fines or violations for minor issues after having a disagreement with Brenda?" 7 hands went up, then 10, then 15. "You're turning them against me," Brenda hissed. "You did that yourself." The vote was called. Secret ballot, counted by Susan and Gerald. When the results were announced, 62% voted for her removal. Brenda sat there in shock as Gerald read the results. Effective immediately, Brenda Carmichael is removed from the position of HOA president. We'll need to hold an emergency election for a replacement within 30 days. Brenda stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out without a word. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 nights later, I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of breaking glass. I jumped out of bed and looked out my window to see Brenda in my driveway, smashing my mailbox with a baseball bat. She'd already destroyed it and was moving toward my car. I didn't hesitate. I called 911 while running downstairs. "There's someone vandalizing my property right now. I can see them. It's my neighbor, Brenda Carmichael." By the time I got outside, she was smashing my car's windshield. Security lights from other houses were turning on. I kept my distance, phone in hand, recording everything. "Brenda, the police are on their way. You need to stop." She turned to me, bat in hand, breathing hard. "You ruined my life. You did this to yourself. I was president, I had respect, and you took it all away. You were abusing your position and vandalizing my property. This is on you." She raised the bat, and for a moment, I thought she might actually charge at me. But then police sirens wailed in the distance, and reality seemed to crash back into her. She dropped the bat and stood there as 2 patrol cars pulled up. Officer Rodriguez was one of the responding officers. He took one look at the scene and shook his head. "Miss Carmichael, I'm placing you under arrest for criminal property damage and trespassing." She didn't resist as he cuffed her. She just kept staring at me with this hollow, broken expression. They put her in the back of the patrol car, and another officer stayed behind to take my statement and photograph the damage. My mailbox was destroyed. My car's windshield was completely smashed. There were also dents on the hood where she'd hit it with the bat. The officer estimated the damage at around $3,000. "We'll need your video footage," he said. "I have it on my phone and backed up to the cloud." "Good. This is pretty clear-cut. With the video evidence and the prior reports, the DA will probably file multiple charges." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on my porch, watching the sun come up, trying to process what had happened. A dispute over a fence post had escalated into arrest and felony charges. The neighborhood was buzzing the next morning. Everyone had heard about Brenda's arrest. Several neighbors stopped by to check on me and offer support. One elderly woman named Patricia brought me a casserole and apologized. "We all knew Brenda was difficult, but none of us stood up to her. We should have done something sooner." "It's not your fault," I told her, still. "You shouldn't have had to deal with all that alone." The criminal case moved quickly. The video evidence was damning, and combined with the documented history of harassment and vandalism, Brenda's attorney advised her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to criminal damage, harassment, and trespassing. The judge sentenced her to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and ordered her to pay full restitution for all damages, including the initial fence repairs, my mailbox, and my car. The total came to $4,800, plus court costs. She also had to file a restraining order agreement, meaning she couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my property. Since we lived across the street from each other, that became complicated. Eventually, her attorney worked out an arrangement where she had to use the back entrance to the neighborhood and couldn't drive down Sycamore Drive at all. But the biggest consequence came from the HOA itself. At an emergency meeting, the residents voted to amend the bylaws to add strict oversight provisions for board members, including term limits, mandatory reviews, and a streamlined removal process. They also voted to pursue a civil case against Brenda for the legal fees her actions had cost the HOA. 3 months later, Brenda's house went up for sale. She moved out quietly one weekend, and I never saw her again. A nice young couple with a baby bought the house. They introduced themselves and seemed genuinely pleasant. We heard there was some drama with the previous owner, the husband said. A bit, I admitted, but that's all resolved now. Good to hear. We just want a quiet place to raise our kid. I think you'll like it here. Life returned to normal after that. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named David Chen, ran things fairly and reasonably. The fence post incident became neighborhood legend, something people would mention at block parties with a mix of amusement and disbelief. My steel I-beam remained exactly where it was, unbothered and undamaged, a monument to the principle that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even over something as simple as a fence post. I repainted the wooden slats every couple of years to keep it looking fresh, but that steel beam underneath wasn't going anywhere. It would probably outlast the house itself. Marcus visited about a year after everything settled down. We stood in my driveway, looking at the corner. "You know," he said, "when you first told me about this, I thought you were being petty. And now I think you were protecting yourself from someone who'd clearly lost all sense of boundaries. That beam probably prevented worse damage down the line." Think she learned anything from all this? Maybe. Or maybe she just found a new neighborhood to terrorize. Some people never change. True. But at least it's not my problem anymore. We went inside and had a beer, and I reflected on the whole bizarre situation. It seemed almost surreal now, looking back. A fence post had become the flashpoint for months of conflict, legal battles, and eventually criminal charges. All because one person couldn't accept a simple truth. My property was my property, and I had every right to protect it. The story spread beyond the neighborhood. A local news station picked it up, running a piece about HOA overreach and property rights. I declined to be interviewed, not wanting to extend my 15 minutes of fame, but they showed footage of the fence and interviewed some neighbors. The coverage was generally sympathetic to my situation. I even got calls from other homeowners dealing with similar HOA nightmares, asking for advice. I'd tell them the same thing every time. Document everything, know your rights, stand your ground, and don't let anyone bully you on your own property. Jennifer, my attorney, used the case as a teaching example for other lawyers dealing with HOA disputes. She told me it was the most thoroughly documented case she'd ever handled, which made her job almost too easy. "You're every attorney's dream client," she said. "You had dates, Times, photos, videos, witness statements, property surveys, copies of bylaws, permits, police reports, everything organized and ready. Most people wait until it's too late to start documenting. I'm thorough, I said. You're paranoid, but in this case, that was exactly what you needed to be. The insurance settlement for my car came through without issue. Between that and the restitution payments Brenda was making, I came out mostly whole financially. The emotional toll was harder to quantify, but I'd moved past it. The house still felt like home, maybe even more so now that I'd fought for it. One afternoon, about 18 months after the whole ordeal ended, I was working in my garage when the new neighbors from across the street, the couple who'd bought Brenda's old house, came over. The husband, Jason, was carrying something. "Hey, Thomas, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" He held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "We were cleaning out the garage and found this hidden in the back of a cabinet. It's addressed to you. We figured we should bring it over rather than just toss it." I took the package, curious. My name was written on it in Brenda's handwriting. Inside was a letter and a check for $500. The letter was surprisingly reflective. Brenda wrote about how the whole situation had forced her to confront issues she'd been ignoring for years. Her need for control, her inability to admit when she was wrong, her tendency to escalate conflicts instead of resolving them. The court-mandated therapy had apparently helped her recognize these patterns. She apologized for everything, acknowledged that she'd been completely in the wrong, and said the check was for the intangible damages, the stress and time I'd lost dealing with her behavior. "Wow," Jason said, seeing my expression. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, folding the letter. Just some closure I didn't expect. I deposited the check and filed the letter with all the other documentation from the case. I didn't respond to it. There was nothing more to say, but I appreciated the gesture. It was rare for someone to genuinely acknowledge their mistakes and try to make amends. Life continued. Seasons changed. I made improvements to the house, always making sure to check HOA regulations first and document everything properly. I'd learned my lesson about assuming things would go smoothly. David, the new HOA president, was actually great to work with. When I wanted to add a small patio in my backyard, he came over personally to review the plans and offered suggestions to make sure everything would be approved. "We're trying to run this HOA the way it should be run," he told me. "Helping homeowners maintain property values while respecting individual rights. It's not that complicated when you approach it reasonably." "Revolutionary concept," I joked. "You'd be surprised how rare it is." The fence corner became oddly popular. People would drive by just to see the legendary steel I-beam that had ended an HOA tyrant's reign. Some teenagers even spray-painted the beam of justice on it one night as a prank. I cleaned it off but couldn't help smiling. Marcus and his family came over for a barbecue one weekend. His kids, 8 and 10, thought the whole story was hilarious. "So you basically made a car trap?" his son asked. "I made a fence that could withstand ongoing vandalism," I corrected. "But she hit it and wrecked her car." "She hit it on purpose, knowing what she was doing. That was her choice." "Still pretty cool, though." His wife, Amy, shook her head. "You're teaching them terrible lessons." "I'm teaching them to protect their property and stand up to bullies," Marcus said, grinning. "Same thing," I added. We ate burgers and watched the kids play in the backyard, and it felt good to have normal, peaceful moments without conflict or drama. This was what I'd wanted when I bought the house. A comfortable place to live, friendly neighbors, and a sense of community. I got that eventually, but it took a steel beam and a lot of legal paperwork to achieve it. The HOA published a newsletter 6 months later featuring a piece about the reforms they'd implemented since Brenda's tenure ended. They talked about increased transparency, better communication with residents, and a renewed focus on community building rather than rule enforcement. They didn't mention the fence post incident specifically, but everyone knew what had prompted the changes. Several other HOAs in the area reached out to David, asking about the reforms and how they'd implemented them. Our neighborhood became a model for how to fix a dysfunctional HOA. It was oddly satisfying to know that something positive had come from all the conflict. I started attending HOA meetings regularly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to stay informed and support the positive direction things were going. Other residents who'd previously avoided meetings started showing up too. Attendance tripled. People actually wanted to participate in their community governance when it wasn't being run by a petty tyrant. At one meeting, an older gentleman named Frank raised his hand during open discussion. "I just want to say," he started, "that I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and this is the first time I've felt like the HOA actually represents the residents. Thomas, I know what you went through was difficult, but thank you for standing your ground. You forced changes that benefited all of us." There was a round of applause. I felt my face get warm. "I just wanted to protect my fence," I said. "You did more than that," Frank continued. "You showed everyone that we don't have to accept abuse from people in authority, that we have rights and can defend them." More applause. David smiled from the head table. "This is what community should be," he said. "Supporting each other, holding leadership accountable, and working together. Let's keep this momentum going." The meeting continued with discussions about playground improvements, a neighborhood garage sale, and updated landscaping for the common areas. Normal, reasonable HOA business. It was almost boring in the best possible way. Afterward, several people came up to chat with me. Some shared their own Brenda stories, interactions where she'd been unreasonable or threatening. They thanked me for ending her reign. It was strange being seen as some kind of neighborhood hero for what basically amounted to installing a steel fence post, but I accepted it gracefully. Patricia, the elderly woman who'd brought me the casserole, pulled me aside. "You know, dear, Brenda tried to fine me 3 times for having my trash cans visible from the street. Never mind that trash day was the next morning and everyone had their cans out. She just didn't like me." "Why didn't you fight it?" "I'm 76 years old. I was tired. It was easier to just pay the fines and try to stay off her radar." She patted my arm. "But you weren't tired. You had the energy to fight and you did it for all of us. Don't underestimate what that means." I drove home that night thinking about what Patricia had said. How many other people had just accepted Brenda's abuse because fighting seemed too exhausting? How much money had residents paid in unjust fines over the years? The fence post might have been the flashpoint, but the underlying issue was about power and accountability. My phone rang the next morning. It was Jennifer, my attorney. "Morning, Thomas. Got some news for you. Good news or bad news, depends on your perspective. Brenda's filed for bankruptcy. She's not going to be able to finish paying the restitution." I sat down at my kitchen table. "How much does she still owe?" "About $1,800. The bankruptcy means that debt gets discharged. So she gets away with it." "Not exactly. The criminal conviction stays on her record. The bankruptcy will tank her credit. She's already had to move and sell her house. She's facing consequences, just not the full financial ones. That's frustrating." "I know. But look at it this way. You got most of the money back. She's been held accountable legally, and she's out of your life. Sometimes that's the best outcome you can hope for." She was right, but it still stung. I'd been meticulous about everything, had done everything right, and still couldn't get complete justice. But then again, life rarely worked out perfectly. I decided to let it go. The money didn't matter that much, and holding on to anger would only hurt me. Brenda was dealing with her own consequences. I had better things to focus on. Work had been going well. I was a software developer working remotely, which had given me the flexibility to deal with all the HOA drama without taking too much time off. My boss had been understanding, even amused by the whole situation. Only you could turn a fence dispute into a federal case, he joked during one video call. State case, actually, never went federal. You know what I mean. Most people would have just moved. I liked the house, still do, and I did. Despite everything, I'd built a life there. I knew my neighbors. I had my routines. The coffee shop 3 blocks away knew my order. The local hardware store guys greeted me by name. This was home, and I'd successfully defended it. Spring came, bringing warm Arizona sunshine and blooming desert plants. I decided to expand my fence, adding sections along the back property line. This time, I went to David first, showed him the plans, and got written approval before starting. The installation went smoothly. No drama, no conflicts. The new sections were standard wood. No need for steel I-beams when you weren't dealing with deliberate vandalism. But that corner post remained, my steel monument to stubbornness and property rights. A journalist from a national HOA reform organization reached out, wanting to interview me for an article about HOA abuse and how to fight back. I agreed, figuring my story might help others in similar situations. The interview was conducted over video chat. The journalist, a woman named Rebecca, was sharp and asked good questions. "What would you say to someone currently dealing with HOA harassment?" she asked. "Document everything. Know your rights. Don't back down if you're legally in the right. And get a good attorney early, before things escalate too far." Do you think HOAs are fundamentally broken? No, I think they are often poorly run by people who enjoy power more than service. Good leadership makes all the difference. Our HOA is functioning great now with proper oversight and accountability. Any regrets about how you handled things? I thought about that. Not really. I wish it hadn't escalated the way it did, but I wouldn't change my core decisions. Standing up for myself was the right choice. The article came out a few weeks later, posted on their website and shared widely on social media. I got emails from people across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories and thanking me for speaking out. It was overwhelming but also validating. This wasn't just my problem. It was a systemic issue affecting thousands of homeowners. Some of the emails were from HOA board members asking for advice on how to avoid becoming like Brenda. I responded when I could, emphasizing transparency, fairness, and remembering that the HOA existed to serve residents, not control them. One email stood out. It was from a man in Colorado who'd been fighting his HOA over a similar fence dispute. He'd followed my advice, documented everything, and successfully defended his property. He thanked me profusely and said he'd been about to give up before reading my story. That made everything worthwhile. If my stubbornness and pain could help even one person avoid the same struggle, then it meant something. Summer arrived with temperatures pushing into the triple digits. I installed a shade structure over my patio, properly permitted and approved. David stopped by to check it out. "Looks great," he said. "You're really fixing up the place." "Might as well. I plan to be here a while. Glad to hear it. We need more residents who actually care about the community." We talked for a bit about upcoming neighborhood events. The annual block party was coming up and they wanted to make it bigger this year. I volunteered to help with setup. The block party was a huge success. Nearly every household participated. Kids ran around playing games, adults chatted over grilled food, and there was a genuine sense of community. At one point, someone gave a toast to our neighborhood and to everyone who makes it a great place to live, especially those who fight for what's right. People cheered and looked at me. I raised my beer in acknowledgement, feeling both proud and slightly embarrassed. Later that evening, as things wound down and families headed home, Jason from across the street came over. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "You ever think about running for HOA board? I think people would vote for you." I laughed. "I've had enough HOA drama for one lifetime." "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, you'd have my vote." It was a nice thought, but I meant what I said. I'd serve on committees, volunteer for events, and stay involved, but I had no desire for a leadership position. I'd learned that sometimes the best way to create change was from outside the power structure, holding leaders accountable rather than becoming one. Fall brought cooler temperatures and a sense of renewal. The neighborhood had fully moved past the Brenda era. New families moved in. Life continued its normal rhythms. I got a LinkedIn message one day from someone claiming to be Brenda's sister. She apologized for her sister's behavior and said Brenda was doing better, working a normal job and continuing therapy. She'd moved to New Mexico and was trying to rebuild her life quietly. I appreciated the message but didn't respond. That chapter was closed. I wished Brenda well in a distant, abstract way, but I had no desire to reopen any communication. Marcus called around Thanksgiving. "Doing anything for the holiday? Probably just a quiet dinner." "Family's coming over. You should join us. Amy's making enough food for an army." I accepted gratefully. It was nice to spend the holiday with friends around a table full of food and laughter. Marcus's kids asked me to tell the fence story again, which had apparently become one of their favorites. "And then her bumper just crunched," the youngest exclaimed, acting out the impact. "That's enough," Amy said, trying not to smile. "Let's talk about something else," but Marcus was grinning. "It really is a great story." "It's a cautionary tale," I corrected, "about what happens when people abuse authority." "And about standing up for yourself," Marcus added. "That's important too." We moved on to other topics, but I thought about what he'd said. Standing up for yourself was important. So was knowing when to fight and when to let go. I'd learned both lessons through all of this. December brought holiday decorations and neighborhood lights. I put up modest decorations, not wanting to attract any attention or potential HOA scrutiny, but David assured me they were fine. "We're not in the business of being decoration police," he said. "As long as it's tasteful and you take it down by mid-January, do whatever you want." What a difference good leadership made. Christmas Eve was quiet. I sat on my porch with hot chocolate, watching cars drive past, including around that corner with my steel fence post. Every vehicle navigated it just fine, as they always had. The post wasn't a hazard. It had never been a hazard. It had just been an excuse for one person's need to control and dominate. I thought about the past 2 years, everything that had happened. The stress, the legal battles, the documentation, the escalation, and finally the resolution. It had been exhausting and frustrating, but I'd come through it. My property was mine, my rights were intact, and my community was better for the changes that had been forced. The steel beam stood solid and unmoved, a physical reminder of the importance of boundaries, both literal and metaphorical. As the new year approached, I made a resolution to stay involved in my community, to support good leadership, and to help others who might face similar struggles. The fence post incident had taught me valuable lessons about power, accountability, and the importance of standing firm when you're right. I also resolved to continue improving my property, not out of spite or competition, but because it was my home and I wanted it to reflect my care and attention. I had plans for a small garden in the spring, maybe some raised beds for vegetables. New Year's Day was bright and clear. I walked around the neighborhood, greeting neighbors and enjoying the peaceful morning. When I got back to my house, I stood at the corner and looked at the fence post. The wood was weathered but solid, the steel underneath invisible but ever present. It had cost me time, money, and stress to install that beam. But it had also saved me from ongoing vandalism, forced accountability on an abusive HOA president, and sparked positive changes throughout the community. In the end, it was worth every penny and every moment of frustration. A car approached the corner, slowed appropriately, and turned without incident, just as it should be. Just as it had always been capable of being if only one person had chosen to drive responsibly instead of destructively. I went inside, made breakfast, and started planning my day. There was yard work to do, some code to write for work, and a book I wanted to finish reading. Normal life, the kind I'd wanted all along. The fence post story would follow me probably forever. It would be mentioned at neighborhood gatherings and shared when new residents asked about the HOA's history. But that was okay. It was a good reminder for everyone about the importance of reasonable governance and the courage to stand up against abuse. And somewhere, buried 3 feet deep in concrete, a steel I-beam stood as a permanent monument to the simple principle that sometimes protecting something as basic as a fence post means protecting something much larger: your rights, your home, and your dignity. That evening, I got an email from the HOA reform organization. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at a conference about HOA abuse and reform. I thought about it for a few days before agreeing. If my experience could help others, then sharing it was worthwhile. The conference was scheduled for the following spring in Las Vegas. It would be my first time speaking publicly about everything that had happened. The thought was nerve-wracking, but also exciting. Maybe I could make a real difference for people struggling with similar situations. I started preparing my presentation, organizing all the documentation and lessons learned into a coherent narrative. The key points were clear. Know your rights, document everything, don't back down when you're legally correct, and push for systemic reform when individual accountability isn't enough. February brought rain to Arizona, a rare and welcome occurrence. I sat in my living room watching water stream down the windows, thinking about how much had changed. The house felt more like home than ever. The neighborhood felt like a real community. And I felt like I'd found my place, not by avoiding conflict, but by facing it head-on and coming through the other side. The fence post remained at the corner, unchanged and unbothered, exactly as it should be. Cars passed it daily without incident. It served its purpose perfectly, marking my property line while bothering absolutely no one who drove with reasonable care and respect. That's all it had ever needed to do. The fact that it had become something more, a symbol and a catalyst for change, was never the intention. But sometimes the smallest things become significant because of the battles fought around them. I grabbed my laptop and continued working on my conference presentation, determined to help others avoid the struggles I'd faced, or at least to face them with better preparation and stronger resolve. The rain continued outside, washing the desert clean, and inside my home, surrounded by the fruits of my hard-fought victory. I smiled and kept writing,